Over the course of these lectures, I've been arguing that we need to reframe the terms of political argument in two ways. First, we need a public debate about the moral limits of markets. And second, we need a more robust public discourse, one that engages more directly with moral and even spiritual questions. In this lecture, I'll try to connect these themes and show how they can form the starting point for a new politics of the common good. First, markets. For 3 decades, the governing philosophy of the United States and Britain was defined by the faith that markets are the primary instrument for achieving the public good. The financial crisis has put this faith in question. The era of market triumphalism has come to an end. But we have yet to find our way to a new governing philosophy. Even President Obama has yet to articulate one. One obstacle to a new public philosophy is a persisting assumption from the age of market faith. It's what I'd like to call market mimicking governance. It's the idea that the primary purpose of government is to correct what economists call market failure. It's the idea that government should try to replicate the outcomes that competitive markets would produce if all goods and resources were properly priced. Consider environmental policy. If air and water are free, that is, unpriced, then companies and consumers will produce too much pollution. So government's job is to set regulations to correct for this market failure, through cap and trade, for example, or a carbon tax. To do this, the policymakers have to ask how much pollution is too much. And to answer this question, they have to figure out what value to place on clean air, clean water, and the resulting health benefits. Here's where market mimicking governance comes into play. In order to make these calculations, regulators often use cost-benefit analysis. They place a monetary value on the benefits of clean air and water, compare them with the costs, and set regulations accordingly. It sounds perfectly sensible. What's wrong with comparing the costs and benefits of government regulation? Nothing, if by comparing costs and benefits you simply mean assessing the advantages and disadvantages of a given policy. But cost-benefit analysis aspires to scientific rigor. It tries to assign a monetary value to costs and benefits. It tries to mimic the market. And here's where it goes wrong. Many of the benefits of public policy involve values that can't be captured in monetary terms. Most notably, the value of human life. Let me offer a few examples. The first involves smoking. In the Czech Republic, many people smoke. Philip Morris, the tobacco company, sells a lot of cigarettes there. Some years ago, the Czech government considered raising taxes on cigarettes. Philip Morris wasn't happy about this. So the company commissioned a cost-benefit analysis of the effects of smoking on the Czech national budget. The study found that the government actually makes more money than it loses from smoking. Although it's true that smokers impose higher medical costs on the budget while they are alive, they die early, and so save the government considerable sums in pensions, housing, and health care for the elderly. According to the study, the so-called positive effects of smoking, once taken into account, lead to a net gain to the Czech Treasury of $147 million per year. So lung cancer, it turns out, has its fiscal advantages. Now, you might say that the cost-benefit analysis, callous though it was simply incomplete. It failed to calculate the cost to the smokers of their early and painful demise. But how might such costs be calculated? A few years ago, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency tried to do this. In presenting a cost-benefit analysis of new air pollution standards, the agency assigned a monetary value to human life. $3.7 million per life saved, except for people over the age of 70, whose lives were valued at $2.3 million. Lying behind the different valuations was a market-mimicking assumption. Younger people with more years still to live would presumably pay more to save their lives than older people would pay to save theirs. Advocates for the elderly didn't see it that way. They bitterly protested the senior citizen discount. The difficulty of placing a monetary value on human life and other non-market goods is one problem with cost-benefit analysis. Another is that monetizing all costs and benefits makes for a spurious science that shifts decision-making from democratic politics to technocrats. Consider cell phones. Should it be illegal to talk on the phone while driving? A few years ago, the Harvard Center for Risk Analysis did a cost-benefit analysis to find out. It concluded that crashes caused by cell phone use while driving cost about $43 billion per year in medical costs and loss of life. A sizable sum. But the study found, by strange coincidence, that the economic benefits of cell phone use while driving also amounted to $43 billion, making it a break-even proposition. But if you look at the assumptions behind the numbers, you find that they are hardly scientific. The study assumes that cell phones cause 2,600 deaths per year. But it admits that the actual number of such deaths per year is somewhere between 800 and 8,000. So depending on which number you choose, the benefits of a ban on cell phones while driving is either $9 billion or $193 billion per year, or maybe somewhere in between. So there's nothing scientific to the conclusion that the costs and benefits of cell phone use while driving are equal. The market-mimicking calculus is no better than a hunch. An even better example of the spurious science of cost-benefit analysis is one offered by Richard Posner, a prominent U.S. legal scholar and judge and the founder of the law and economics movement. Posner analyzed the costs and benefits of a powerful particle accelerator built at Brookhaven, Long Island, a federal research facility. He wanted to weigh the benefits of the research against the very slight but rather alarming risk that the particle accelerator would destroy the Earth. Posner estimated the value of the research to be $250 million per year, and the risk that the thing would destroy the Earth to be 1 in 10 million. To decide whether it was worth it, he assigned a monetary value to the potential extinction of the human race. $600 trillion. Doing the math, he calculated that the cost of the project outweighed the benefit by $100 million, and so he concluded it shouldn't be built. Cost-benefit analysis is one instance of what I'm calling market-mimicking governance. It's objectionable on two grounds. First, it puts a price tag on goods, including human life, whose value can't be captured in monetary terms. Second, by claiming to be a science of public choice, it elevates technocratic decision-making at the expense of democratic deliberation. But cost-benefit analysis is only one expression of market-mimicking governance. Another is the broader idea that the primary purpose of government is to correct for market failure. Economists have long recognized that markets don't produce efficient outcomes in certain circumstances, when economic activity produces externalities, effects on third parties, such as pollution, or when it would be impossible for a private company to collect payment from everyone who uses a service. These are classic market failures that require government intervention. But the idea that correcting for market failure is the main rationale for government, that idea has emerged only recently. It was the way that center-left parties, on the defensive after the Reagan-Thatcher era, tried to restate the case for government. For a time, it seemed to succeed, with New Labour in the UK and with Bill Clinton and the New Democrats in the United States. As a governing philosophy, however, the task of correcting market failures is too humble and too narrow. Democratic governance is radically devalued if reduced to the role of handmaiden to the market economy. Democracy is about more than fixing and tweaking and nudging incentives to make markets work better. The purpose of markets is to organize productive activity so as to maximize consumer welfare. But democratic governance is about much more than maximizing GDP or satisfying consumer preferences. It's also about seeking distributive justice, promoting the health of democratic institutions, and cultivating the solidarity and sense of community that democracy requires. Market-mimicking governance, at its best, can satisfy us as consumers, but it can do nothing to make us democratic citizens. Why then have we drifted, on both sides of the Atlantic, away from older traditions of solidarity and civic virtue and toward more market-oriented ways of conceiving public life? The answer does not lie simply in the market fundamentalism of the Reagan-Thatcher years, or in the heady economic times of the 1990s and the years before the crash. Market-mimicking governance is appealing because it seems to offer a way of making political choices without making hard and controversial moral choices. It seems to be non-judgmental. So, for example, rather than engage in a morally charged debate about the proper way of valuing the environment or about the attitudes toward nature we should try to cultivate, rather than do this, we try to set environmental policy by working from people's market preferences. And so we ask people how much they would pay to save the spotted owl, or we try to determine the monetary value people implicitly place on their lives when they accept risky jobs. And then we crank the dollar value of human life, or of spotted owls, into a cost-benefit analysis, and we do the math. Actually, we don't do the math. Experts and technocrats do it for us. The non-judgmental impulse is also an anti-democratic impulse. This brings me back to a theme that has run through these lectures. The attempt to empty politics of moral controversy may seem to be a way of respecting our differences, but it is actually corrosive of democratic life. The flight from moral judgment and moral argument in politics predates the era of market triumphalism. It found expression on both sides of the Atlantic, beginning in the 1950s and 60s, partly as a reaction against fascist and communist ideologies, and partly as an attempt to spare politics from becoming embroiled in religious strife. And it also reflected a growing faith in economics as a value-neutral science. Harold Macmillan expressed this sensibility when he said in 1963, quote, "If people want a sense of purpose, they should get it from their archbishop. They should certainly not get it from their politicians," end quote. And John F. Kennedy, a very different kind of politician, articulated a similar sentiment. Most of the problems that we now face, Kennedy said in 1962, are technical problems, are administrative problems. They are very sophisticated judgments which do not lend themselves to the great sort of passionate movements which have stirred this country so often in the past, end quote. Kennedy was referring to the economy, not to the civil rights movement, a passionate movement, if ever there was one, and a powerful example of a morally contentious and spiritually inspired form of politics. The renunciation of moral and religious argument in politics in the decades following World War II prepared the way for the market triumphalism of the past 3 decades. But times have changed. The financial crisis has discredited market triumphalism in both its laissez-faire and neoliberal versions. And the election of Barack Obama has given powerful expression to the hunger for a public life of larger meaning that engages more directly with moral and spiritual questions. All of which suggests that the time may be right for a new kind of politics, a politics of the common good. What might such a politics look like? Unlike market-driven politics, a politics of the common good invites us to think of ourselves less as consumers and more as citizens. Here's why this matters. Market-mimicking governance takes people's preferences as given and fixed. But when we deliberate as citizens, when we engage in democratic argument, the whole point of the activity is critically to reflect on our preferences, to question them, to challenge them, to enlarge them, to improve them. Every successful movement of social or political reform has done more than change the law. It has also changed attitudes and dispositions, what Tocqueville called the habits of the heart. Political leaders should bear this in mind when making the case for change. Consider health. Britain was able to create a taxpayer-financed national health system because of a widely shared sense of social solidarity that said access to health care should not depend on a person's ability to pay. The United States has not yet been able to summon that solidarity. If President Obama succeeds in getting universal health care, it will not only be because people conclude that the present system is too costly and inefficient. It will happen if and when Americans are persuaded that providing for the health of everyone is among the mutual responsibilities of citizenship. Consider the environment. If the countries of the world are able to change patterns of energy use and bring about a meaningful reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, it will not be because emissions trading schemes allow countries to buy and sell the right to pollute. Market mechanisms can be useful instruments, but real change will depend on changing people's attitudes toward nature and rethinking our responsibilities toward the planet we share. This is a moral and spiritual project, not only an economic one. Finally, consider an issue that doesn't get much attention in our politics these days: inequality. In the United States, as in most countries, the gap between rich and poor deepened during the decades of market triumphalism. Inequalities of income and wealth are now at levels not seen since the 1930s. Politicians find it difficult to talk about inequality. Even Barack Obama's modest proposal to return income tax rates to where they stood in the 1990s prompted charges during the campaign that he was a dangerous socialist who wanted to spread the wealth. Part of the problem, I think, is that we tend to talk about inequality as if the problem were how to redistribute access to private consumption. But the real problem with inequality lies in the damage it does to the civic project, to the common good. Here's why. Too great a gap between rich and poor undermines the solidarity that democratic citizenship requires. As inequality deepens, rich and poor live increasingly separate lives. The affluent send their children to private schools or to public schools, as we call them in the United States, in wealthy suburbs, leaving urban public schools to the children of families who have no alternative. A similar trend leads to the withdrawal by the privileged from other public institutions and facilities. Private health clubs replace municipal recreation centers and swimming pools. Affluent residential communities hire private security guards and rely less on public police protection. A second or third car removes the need to rely on public transportation, and so on. This trend has two bad effects. one fiscal, the other civic. First, public services deteriorate as those who no longer use them become less willing to support them with their taxes. Second, public institutions such as schools, parks, playgrounds, and community centers cease to be places where citizens from different walks of life encounter one another. Institutions that once gathered people together and served as informal schools of civic virtue have become few and far between. The hollowing out of the public realm makes it difficult to cultivate the sense of community that democratic citizenship requires. So, rather than focus on access to private consumption, a politics of the common good would make the case for rebuilding the infrastructure of civic life. Public schools, to which rich and poor alike would want to send their children. Public transportation systems, reliable enough to attract commuters from all walks of life. Public health clinics, playgrounds, parks, recreation centers, libraries, and museums that would, ideally at least, draw people out of their gated communities and into the common spaces of a shared democratic citizenship. In the course of these lectures, I've argued for a greater role for moral argument in public life and for the need to keep markets in their place. I would like to conclude by anticipating one possible objection. The distinguished economist Kenneth Arrow once wrote, and I quote, "Like many economists, I do not want to rely too heavily on substituting ethics for self-interest. I think it is best on the whole that the requirement of ethical behavior be confined to those circumstances where the price system breaks down. We do not wish," he said, "to use up recklessly the scarce resources of altruistic motivation." End quote. The notion that ethics, altruism, and fellow feeling are scarce resources whose supply is fixed once and for all and depleted with use, this idea seems to me outlandish but deeply influential. My aim in these lectures has been to call this idea into question. I've tried to suggest that the virtues of democratic life, community, solidarity, trust, civic friendship, these virtues are not like commodities that are depleted with use. They are rather like muscles that develop and grow stronger with exercise. A politics of moral and civic renewal depends, it seems to me, on a more strenuous exercise of these civic virtues. Thank you very much.